We are back again. We
We're
are kind of doing a tangent off of listings because recently I've had a few condo listings I have listed, and part of that is having a resale certificate.
Yeah.
So
we're drinking the same wine as our
Sorry,
last
guys.
episode. There's nothing more. I dropped the ball this time. Didn't bring an extra bottle.
Typically, I don't bring a bottle, so I did this time.
Cheers. So we're just drinking a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty good though. I feel like the more it's sat out, the better it's gotten a little bit.
A little less busy for me.
Yeah. So you're welcome.
Yeah. Thanks.
Anyway, so resale certificates. So on the listing side, part of like the listing process is if you own a condo, we are required by law to provide a resale certificate.
Is there a certain amount of time, or is it like when immediately?
I mean, so the thing is, the resale certificates expire after 45 days upon receiving it. So it's like 0 to 45 days. It's valid, which that ties into kind of the lending a little bit. But we want to make sure it's recent. So typically I will have my sellers order the resale certificate. By the way, resale certificate is kind of like a high level overview of the HOA's health financially. Are there special assessments? Special assessment meaning with a condo, you typically own walls in. The exterior, so siding, roofing, that sort of thing is maintained by the HOA. That's why your dues are high. It's paying into a reserve account to, hey, in 20 years, we need to replace the siding, that sort of thing. So this resale certificate gives great info to the buyer on how are the finances doing of the HOA, the rules of the HOA. Also gives the lender a lot of good info, which you're going to dive into for financeability.
Yeah. Yep.
But anyway, I typically have my sellers order it within about a week prior to listing.
Okay.
It can take, if you order it on a rush, it can come back in like 2 to 3 days, business days. If you just let it be, typically I find it's taking about 10 days to get those back. So typically if we order it about a week to 10 days prior to listing, we typically have it so that buyers can review that for the offer review date, or have that relatively quickly after listing so buyers can review that information.
Yeah, and that's an important thing for us to have, because as soon as we get the signed around contract, we have to start with the whole condo approval, and it's considered a warrantable condo is what's the approval process.
Yeah, if you're a cash buyer, I mean, the HOA health may or may not affect you. I mean, the risk is that you might have a big special assessment that like per each unit has to pay X amount of dollars to
you want to be aware
build up the reserves. You need to be aware of that and okay with that, like that risk tolerance. But I would say most of the time it's the buyers are getting financing.
Yeah.
And there's like a difference between conventional and FHA, VA financing, which Denae will kind of touch on.
Yeah.
But
so that resale cert kind of gives us an initial overview. It gives us as a lender the not even us as the bank lender, but me as the one that's kind of the in between between the bank and to be like, okay, is there going to be any issues? Is there anything we need to get ahead of? It also gives us contact for the HOA for us to reach out, because we will need additional information.
Yep.
As you mentioned, there's different approvals for different processes for different programs. So FHA and VA have their own separate, essentially pre-approved list. And if you're not on that list, it's not eligible.
You could get spot approval.
Yes, that's what I was going to go into. You could get spot approval, and that's a whole other thing. But if it's not on there, it's not. You have to go through approval. Yep. Conventional, any condo is conventional, potentially eligible. Yep. There's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Each of them have slightly different requirements. Generally the same, but slight percentage difference and stuff like that. Fannie Mae is now just starting working on getting like on there. They have an approved list. Okay. It's very, very small. It's new. It's a big old process to actually get a condo on there. But that's kind of cool to see that that's starting as well. So over the last like 3 years, condo approval has become an even bigger headache. So whether listeners are aware or not, in June of 2021, there was a massive condo collapse in Florida.
Literal collapse.
It was at like 2:00 in the morning, and it just, nothing hit it.
That's coming back to my mind now.
It just collapsed, and it was due to deferred maintenance.
horrible.
And so now, like, that's always been something that's been looked at, but it's looked under a microscope.
It's much more scrutinized
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. So for a conventional loan, typically if you're over 10% down, you can do a limited condo review. If you're 10% or less down, you have to do a full condo review.
Okay.
I say that though, of a lot of lenders are just doing full condo reviews across the board, just because it's all due to that.
Wow.
And it just really depends on the questionnaire length. So a full condo review is 20 plus questions, and
that's called a lender questionnaire, correct?
A condo questionnaire.
Condo questionnaire.
Condo questionnaire. So that's where the resale cert comes in. Is we take that resale cert, we find the HOA contact, and we reach out to them and we request this questionnaire. We request sometimes we get an updated resale cert depending on the timeline of it. We get meeting minutes, we get budgets, we get all of the information regarding the HOA health. Yep. And the questionnaire will give us a little bit more insight on maintenance, litigation, budgets, all of that type of stuff. So when we're looking through that, we are looking for 10% reserves of the budget, of the operating budget.
Okay, got it.
And then...
Is that annual budget?
Annual operating budget.
Okay.
Yep. And then that 15% of the total units are not 60 days or more late on payment.
Okay.
So just kind of like, that's kind of the financial health of the HOA. Sure. Is it healthy? Is it strong?
Right.
And then we're looking to make sure that there's the right percentage of investment or of primary residence investment. It can't be overly saturated with investment properties.
So can't have a lot of renters in the community.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
And we also need to make sure that, so if it's a 5 to 20 unit condo complex, one single party can't own two or more units.
Interesting. Okay.
Or if it's 20 plus, they can't own 20 to 25. That depends on Fannie and Freddie.
Wow. Okay.
So if a single party owns a ton of them, that can be an issue.
Okay. What are some other reasons a property might not be financeable?
The biggest thing that I've seen for condos is deferred maintenance and litigations.
Okay.
I think I've had only one condo that we were at close date and we're like, we're still trying to get what we need. And then it ended up being like, we cannot get this because there's a massive lawsuit going on and we cannot get around it.
Lawsuit, like, was it, I've seen it where the homeowners will sue the builder because of issues on the exterior. Was it kind of like that?
This one was probably like 5 or 6 years ago. So I don't remember.
I had one a couple years ago where it had just gotten out of litigation, like a few months prior to me listing 2 of the units.
Okay.
And the homeowners actually sued the builder because the building envelope, the siding, was not waterproof, and they were literally having water.
Yeah, that would be an issue.
Pour into their townhouses.
That would be an issue.
Absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not a surface level. If it's there, it's a no ifs, ands, or buts. It's where are you at in the process?
Okay.
Do we know who's paying for it?
Oh, okay.
Has work started?
Sure.
So there's a few things that go into it that is not like cut and dry.
Okay.
And that's why, someone was come to me and be like, hey, here's a situation. I'm going to say, I'm going to need a lot more questions because maybe they have enough information on what it's going to cost and who's going to pay for it, that it's not a big deal.
Yeah. I think more often than not, when I'm specifically working with condo buyers, I'm almost always running the property. Like, I'm sending the listing to my lender being like, is this okay?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to like go through this whole process of writing an offer and then like, crap, we can't finance it.
And it's really that we need that resale cert.
Yeah. And more often than not, we do have it before a buyer writes an offer.
Yeah. Sometimes that resale cert has everything for us to say that's going to be an issue or it's not. Right. Sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
Because that condo questionnaire is what will have a little bit more detail on all of that.
Gotcha. So does it matter? I think we talked about this a little bit. Does it matter what the occupancy of other units is?
Yes.
And what is that
So
percentage?
if 75% of the units are either an investment property or second home, it'll be a red flag. It's not.
That's a lot.
That's
though.
a lot.
That's
Yeah.
a freaking lot.
Yes. Yes. And generally speaking, outside of condos as well, like an investment home and a second home are looked very similarly now.
Right.
There's slight difference still, but with Airbnbs and everything,
Mhm.
they're kind of looked at as,
Makes sense.
because most people that if they buy a second home and
they're probably going to rent it out at some
exactly,
point. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Makes sense.
condo reviews. So I don't know if this is common in other areas, but in Seattle areas, builders a lot of time will condominiumize massive lots that are single family homes. So if they're condominiumized but are fully detached, we don't have to do a full condo review.
Interesting.
Because it's not they own the land.
Yeah. Okay.
They are not they don't have any shared space.
Sure.
They don't share siding, they don't share anything like that.
Makes sense.
Interesting. If the complex is only 2 to 4 units, we also aren't required to do it. Just because it's so small.
Interesting.
And the likelihood of them having a robust HOA is slim, and it's more localized.
That's super interesting to me, because I would think with like a smaller complex, like for me as a buyer broker, I would be like, okay, do they have any money for siding?
Yeah.
Do they have any money for roofing? Like, and at the end of the day, are you going to be able to knock on your other 3 neighbors' doors and be like, hey guys, like I've got a roof leak, we need to get this taken care of, and is that going to be a problem? Like that's where my head goes. That's really interesting. I think it's also, because maybe there's less people to argue with.
There's less people argue it, and there's less, like if it's a 50 unit condo complex.
Yeah.
You're in building D, I'm in building A.
Sure.
Building A, something happens in building A, well, you in building D are still going to be a part of that maintenance.
That makes
Where
sense.
if it's just 4 units,
sure,
you're likely all in the same building.
Okay.
Or it's 2 and 2.
That makes sense.
And it's just you and one other person that needs to fix the roof.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So like there's the budget that we get a copy of their operation budget, that sort of thing. What are you guys as lenders looking for on the budget?
Look for 10% reserves of
for the operational budget.
Yep. And then just delinquencies.
You already talked about that.
Already mentioned that. Yeah, that's good. And then just the delinquencies.
Okay.
So I think the only other things that are really like high level reasons why a property wouldn't be financeable is condotels. We don't really see those here in Washington. Suncadia is a great example of a condotel, though. The resort, people own those individual units, but they're managed and rented out through the hotel. So those are a whole separate thing. Okay. And they're all, condotels are huge in Hawaii.
Yep.
Any sort of timeshare, fractional ownership, stuff like that.
Sure.
If there's business operating, if the HOA is operating business through it, and that's
meaning like they have retail space,
they have a restaurant, they have a spa.
Oh,
and really that comes down to the idea that it's a resort. So kind of goes back to the condotel and showing that it's not a condotel.
Okay.
Commercial space, residential. Wow, I can't say that.
That's okay.
Non-residential. I promise you, we haven't had that much wine.
No, we had like one glass of that.
Commercial or non-residential can't exceed 35%.
35% of the space. Okay. Interesting.
Yep. And then we already talked about the project not being named into pending litigation.
Right.
And then the single party ownership. Those are kind of the ones that would be a no-go on those.
I mean, if anything, what you're hearing from us today is like, if you're a buyer, you need to run a listing that's in a condo buyer lender. And then if you are a seller, where I've seen this come into play and it actually worked out beautifully for my seller, the HOA was about to have a huge, and I'm talking huge, special assessment. Like we're talking $90,000 to $100,000 per unit. And we, my homeowner knew this, that it had been talked about for 8+ years, and the HOA still didn't do anything about it. That should honestly be a red flag to a buyer. Well, I had my my seller disclose, like, hey, there's been talk of a special assessment for years and years and years. There isn't anything in writing right now, so there is no special assessment, but you need to be aware it's probably coming. It worked out beautifully because our buyer was cash. But that's I think the biggest thing for me as a buyer broker is I'm looking for, do you have a special assessment coming up? If so, what is it, and how is that going to impact my buyer's budget?
Yep.
Because HOA dues affect lending approval.
We have to. That's not paid in your mortgage, but I always quote those in all my payments, because it counts for your DTI, debt to income ratio, and I want to make sure you have a full picture of what you're spending.
Right. And then I think a big thing for me on the buyer broker side as well is looking at the reserve study. You guys don't really look at that too much on the lending side, do you?
Like exactly what everything's allocated to, sort of thing.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, really anything like that, or like, hey, the siding's going to be replaced in like 2 years or something like that.
Yeah, we look to make sure that they're doing preventative maintenance, and that's still kind of all from the Florida, but it's we don't like go into the nitty gritties on.
So reserve study, I pay attention to that quite a bit on the buyer broker side, because I want to see, so technically a reserve study is required by HOAs every 2 years. And it's basically a third party kind of doing like a home inspection almost of the exterior of the property, and then telling the HOA, hey, your useful life on your roof is 20 years, even though the expected life was 30. And then it gives the HOA good information to go, okay, we need to start thinking about upping dues a little bit. Or, maybe we do need to do a special assessment because per this reserve studyist, they're saying that we're only 30% funded. And that means that a huge special assessment is probably around the corner. Like a lot of it depends on like when projects need to get taken care of. But that's a big thing that I'm looking for on the buyer broker side is making sure my client understands that if they love this place, but hey, the roof is needing to get replaced in the next 5 years. Like, hey, I just want you to be aware, based on this reserve account, it's likely
you could have an increase, big increase. Yeah. And I would say like doing your due diligence both as a seller and a buyer are huge in condos. I think closing timelines are going to be extended for condos.
It's not typically a 30-day, like I would say
30 days is 30
fine. 30 days is pretty good. I mean, it's kind of rare to do like a really short
you're not doing a 20-day close on a condo. It's I kind of want to say I've never had turned in all the documentation and not had my condo desk come back with more questions.
Sure.
It's just
how it is.
It's just how it is. Yeah.
It takes time to get that approval.
And there's little things that may not be a big deal. And then sometimes what's hard is one thing's asked for that's not a big deal, but then we get that and that has a lot of information on it. And then it opens up another can of worms. So it can be this whole roundabout thing.
So speaking of special assessment, kind of like a tangent, but this also I think applies to both sellers and buyers. When you see a special assessment on the questionnaire, how does that affect a buyer's ability to finance the property? Like if it is a ratified special assessment and it's like, there's a $15,000 balance or whatever per this unit and the seller isn't going to pay it off, how does that factor into the lending? Does that tie into their debt to income ratio?
Yeah, typically that's made into a monthly payment.
Okay.
And so we just have to apply that 200, 400, whatever it is to their debt to income ratio.
Okay, perfect.
So that's definitely, and most listings will show special assessments on there.
There's a box where we're required to check yes or no. There is a special assessment.
Yeah.
Whether a listing agent does that correctly or not, I don't know.
But if there's a special assessment that most of my buyers send me and I run specific numbers, if it's not there, it comes up later that could be an issue of like, oh, this special assessment was $600. you don't
No big
qualify for, or no big deal,
yeah,
or
yeah,
you don't
or,
qualify,
yeah.
and we have to do that. But I've never had that
Sure.
happen, but
Sure.
that would be
Yeah,
something that
sellers on the seller side, kind of talking about like the dues. So a special assessment assessed before closing, yet due after closing. That is a line on the purchase and sale agreement, whether or not the buyer is paying for that, or the seller is paying for it. I would honestly advise my sellers, if your special assessment balance is like $10K or less, I would probably recommend you just pay that off with your proceeds at closing.
could.
Like, let's just let it be a clean account. And it will, like, your buyers will appreciate you doing that for them, so they don't have that extra payment on top of the HOA dues. But sometimes a seller can't financially afford that, and so it's just the buyer needing to understand, like, okay, this is on top of my general HOA dues that we have to factor that in.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like, cool, they just replaced all the siding and the roofing, and it's like, it's a major improvement to the value of the property. I think it might make sense to like take on that special assessment and just keep paying it off depending on how long you plan to be there.
Yeah, so. For sure. Yeah, and I think condos are such a hard one.
Yeah.
As buyers, especially in the area that we're at, because they can be more affordable.
Yep, they are.
But when you think about
depending on the HOA dues,
sometimes it's the same
payment.
Same payment. Rates are also affected by condos.
Okay.
And it's kind of the same if it's a detached condo.
Okay.
It's single family pricing.
Interesting.
Okay. But if there is a single wall attached, it is a condo, and it's condo pricing. If you're a first-time home buyer under a certain income limit, it doesn't really affect that, because there's the LLPA caps, or loan level pricing adjustment caps.
How much is the difference in percentage typically between single family versus? Is it dependent on like credit?
Of course, it's dependent on.
You're going to expect to pay a little bit more on your percentage.
I would expect to spend a 1/4 to 1/2% more on.
That's not nothing.
Yeah, it's not nothing. It's something to definitely consider.
Okay. Yeah, it's I'll have buyers, I would say, in like that 400 is pretty low in our area, but I mean, if you're in like that $400,000 to like $700,000 price range, and you're open to condos and houses, I definitely ask the lender, can you run kind of a scenario for both single family and condos? Because holy cow, it makes a huge difference.
Yep.
And then my buyer might think that they are a condo buyer, but then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I can do single family. Like maybe I have to go look out, further in Snohomish County or something like that. But, if they're open to that, like that can open up doors for them. But also condos can be a really good first-time home buyer tool, especially if there is no rental cap, meaning no restrictions on rentals. It can be a great opportunity to get into that lower price point for affordability. And then either you turn around and use it as a rental property in the future, or you cash out and upgrade to a single family home. So
it's definitely a way to get your foot in the door, and there's a little bit more affordability out there.
I have a closing the end of this month, and it's a condo. She bought it about 5 years ago, and it's our value has gone up, let's see here, $230,000, if that is what our final purchase price ends up being. Just again, appraisal I'm a little nervous about, which they know about that. But that's a lot of money that she made in 5 years, and they are turning around and building a beautiful new construction 4-bedroom home. So
it's a great way to get in the market. Just get something.
Get in the market. The longer you are in the market, the more ROI you're going to get.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, this is a good episode.
Yeah. I think condos are not cut and dry.
No.
Condos are not really an easy process. I'm not going to try and be like, oh, we'll make it so easy. I'm going to make
it's a whole nother contingency on the buy side that you have to get through. And again, if you're on the sell side, that's a whole nother contingency that you also have to have your buyer work through as well. Yeah. So
here's to home buying and home selling.
Heck yes.
Cheers.
Cheers.